Salam everyone. So excited to bring you another lecture. This time this is going to be on the concept of Hajj. More specifically, we are going to cover 8 different things within the agenda or our agenda for this lecture. What I'm going to do is in fact talk about Surah al-Hajj, which has about 78 total verses. So I'm going to break these down into readable chunks so we understand the context of the entire surah, the purpose of the entire surah, and what is really happening. Okay. So, of course, as always, I'm going to start with the root meaning, the triliteral root, ha, jim, jim, or hey, jim, jim, occurs 33 times in the Quran in 8 derived forms. So we are going to take a look at those, what those different occurrences are in the Quran, so we really understand the actual meaning of the word and the purpose of the meaning of the word as per Quran. Second, we're going to take a look at Surah Hajj, which is chapter 22, complete in context. There are 78 verses, so I'm not going to go step by step. So in order to save time, what I did was actually broken down right into sizable chunks so you can follow along. And if you need to reflect back, of course, on your own time, you can read the entire surah or 78 verses by yourself. So this surah is the audience in this surah is mankind. Okay, so it's Ya Ayyuhan Nas, so it's for everyone. Okay, so God is talking about mankind in this entire surah. So typically that's the main theme of this entire surah. Okay, so the audience is mankind. It's not the believers specifically, right? It's not the non-believers or those who do not heed warning, right? Al-kafirun, people who know the truth but they hide it, right? Those are called kafirs or kafirs, right? So that's really the theme of the surah. It's about mankind, okay, for everyone. Third, we're going to take a look at the different categories of people that God defines. So the first category is, we'll take a look at it in verse 3. The second category of people, verse 8. Third category is verse 11. So primarily there are 3 different kinds of people or different kinds of thoughts, right? Types of people that are out there. God typically talks about those 3 kinds mainly. And then as an example, agenda point number 5, God talks about the 2 disputants, right? There are 2 people who are fighting about, contending about God. So this is in verse 19, so we'll take a look at that as well. And then point number 6 is those who forsake the path of God and inviolable place of worship, or Masjid al-Haram, people who stop, right, from going to the Masjid al-Haram, which God says we made for mankind equally. And these are in verse 25 and 26. So we'll take a look at those. Why can or who can actually stop people from visiting or taking a look at this particular place, and why do we need to go there, and the purpose, and so on. So we'll explore that as we move along. So agenda point number 7 is proclaim thou. So God is telling the prophet, all right, so proclaim among mankind. Okay, once again, it's about mankind, for everyone, not just for Muslims, it's for everyone. Pilgrimage. And these are extensively covered in verse 27 through verses 40, which really is the essence, the purpose of Hajj. Why people go there and what do they do actually when they get there. Okay, so this is covered within verses 27 and 40. And then finally, the surah ends with an example presented by God to mankind and guidance as well. So it's from verse 73 to 78. And of course, in between verses, God talks about believers and people who do not heed warning and how they'll be punished and whatnot. Okay, so I'm going to try to cover within the context. And of course, once you read it from start to finish, you'll have a solid understanding of Surah Hajj itself. Perfect. So let me go ahead and bring up my Quran here. So what I've done is I've split the screen here, you'll notice. And the reason why I did this so that I could scroll up on one and then the same surah scroll on the bottom. So if we need to reflect back on some of the verses, I can do so by splitting the screen. It's the same surah, same everything. Okay. All right, great. So let me bring up first agenda point, which is our occurrence of the word Hajj, which is 33 times in the Quran. So let's take a look at that quickly. So the triliteral root ha jim jim occurs 33 times in the Quran in 8 derived forms. So these forms are once in form 1 verb, 12 as a form 3 verb, once as a form 6 verb, 9 times as a noun, and of course once as a noun, once as a noun, and 7 times as a noun, and then once as the active participle. So here's the list. You can take a look at, make it bigger so you can actually see. There we go. So the first form 1 verb is hajja, which is perform hajj, from hajj al-bayt. And then form 3 is to argue. So one of the meanings is, of course, to perform hajj and to argue. Okay, so the meaning argue, whether it's a form 1 verb or a form 3 verb, is to argue and to argue. Okay, these are the common meanings regardless of the type of verb. Then if I scroll down, this is again yet a verb, to dispute, right, which is again to argue, fight, to dispute. And then the rest is just a noun, it's a thing. Okay, so again it's an argument. So primarily the prevalent meaning of the actual word hajj, doesn't matter which form it comes into the Quran, 33 times it relates to some kind of an argument, some kind of fight, some kind of people contending about an issue. But typically hajj is equated with actually a ritual, right, a set of rituals that people perform once a year when they go to hajj. Obviously these rituals are not found in the Quran itself, right? Therefore typically Muslims would say, well, the Quran is incomplete because we need the hadiths, we need the other books to explain the Quran. Well, the Quran, um, in all fairness, claims to be a complete book. Several times it challenges people to bring such a book, right? So it's not only a complete book, but it does not have any inconsistency, which is the evaj, right? Evaja. So with that said, since we explored the Quran itself and we understand the Quran is a complete book and it has all the answers, okay? That's why it's a complete book. Otherwise, it would not be complete if it didn't have the answers that you and I are looking for or anyone is looking for. All right, perfect. So we understand the root meaning of the word is argue. Of course, people also say it's a pilgrimage or it's a type of pilgrimage. Perfect. So next agenda point, let's take a look at that, is the actual surah, and the audience is mankind. So let's dive into the actual surah. Let me bring up the Quran here. There we go. So it starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and here's the audience, right? Ya ayyuhan nas, O mankind. So the very first verse, it starts with, God says, Ya ayyuhan nas, attaqu rabbakum. So be in prudent fear of your Lord. So that's the idea. Okay, so always be in prudent fear of your Lord. And why? Because the convulsion of the hour is a tremendous thing. Because the day of judgment, of course, is a big day, right? And that day, you see it, every nursing mother will neglect what she suckles, right? So that's indeed a big day. So the audience, of course, is people, mankind. All right, perfect. So I'm going to scroll down, and in verse 3 is the first category of people, okay? So this is our agenda point number 3. verse 3. And here it is, woman and nas, right, and among men. And this is going to be repeating itself in verse 8 and verse 11, other verses as well, where God talks about the categories of people. It starts with the same two words, woman and nas, right, and among men. Is he who disputes concerning God without knowledge, right? مَن يُجَادِلُ فِي اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. So this is the first category. Category of people out there who dispute concerning God without any knowledge. Okay? So that's the first type of people out there. Then we get to our next type of people, which is verse 8. So let's scroll down. And in verse 8, once again, it starts with woman and nas, and among men is he who disputes concerning God without knowledge, which is again the same verse, sort of like repeated, right? Verse 3. But this time, God adds, or guidance. So you are fighting, disputing concerning God without knowledge. You are disputing concerning God among men. There are people who dispute concerning God without guidance, any guidance. Or, and without any wala kitab munir, or any highlighted book or illuminating decree or doctrine, right? So this is the second type of people, okay, where people fight or dispute concerning God without knowledge, without guidance, and without any book or without any decree or doctrine. So that's the second type of person. Perfect. So the first category is verse 3. The second category of people is verse 8. And then the third category, let's go to verse 11. So you will know. So here it is. Woman and nas, same thing. Okay, and among men is he who serves God upon the edge. So the third category of people, God says, woman and nas may ya'budullahi ala harfin, right? So this is the type of people who actually serve God, but really are on the edge. Now, what is the edge? If good befalls him, he is assuaged thereby, but if a means of denial befalls him, he turns about his face. So if something good happens, perfect, he's happy. But if a problem occurs, right, then he's upset. Okay, he loses this world and the hereafter. خسر الدنيا والآخرة. That is a clear loss. So this is the third kind of person, right, out there among men, among mankind. Perfect. So, and what he does, this person does in verse 12, if I continue, he calls besides God to that which harms him not and benefits him not. يَدْعُو مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَضُرُّهُ وَمَا لَا يَنْفَعُهُ. So, again, the person who's living on the edge, right, he serves God, right? I mean, he says that, yes, I believe in God, and he serves God, but at the same time, he calls besides God, but no one can help him. That person, or he calls besides God to that which, cannot harm him or cannot provide him any benefit. And that is an extreme error. He calls for him those harm is nearer than the benefit. Evil is the benefactor, and evil is the confederate, right? All right, so we understand the three types of people. Let me bring up the agenda points here. Perfect. So we know what the root word is primarily the argument disputing, about God. And now we understand further that the three types of people are actually disputing about God itself, right? Who's God, the presence of God, why God, etc., etc., all these types of fight. Then we get into the example. Then God gives us actually an example of the type of fight. People are actually disputing, contending about God. And this is in verse 19. Two disputants, right? As an example is verse 19. So let's navigate to verse 19 and take a look at this particular example of what is actually happening here. Perfect. So God says, Hazani Khasmani, which means two disputants, okay? Because in Arabic, there are primarily three, types. There's a singular, there's a plural, and there's dual, okay? So in English, it's just single and plural, right? But in Arabic language, Arabic grammar, there is another form called two, like Hazan, khasman. That means there are two disputants contending about their Lord. اختصموا في ربهم. Okay, so now we know, as an example, God is saying there are two people who are fighting, contending about the Lord. Then those who are indifferent to warning, right? Garments of fire have been cut for them, poured from above their heads is a scalding liquid. Fused therewith is what is in their bellies and their skins, and they have restraints of iron. Whenever they desire to come out there from distress, they are returned thereto, and the taste, the punishment of the consuming fire. Okay? And God makes those who heed warning do deeds of righteousness enter gardens, beneath which rivers flow, wherein they are adorned with bracelets of gold and pearls, and their raiment there is silk. By the way, for Muslims, typically gold is haram, and typically silk is also haram if you read the hadith and all. Anyways, so let's not get into that at this point, maybe a different lecture. So God is talking about the people who are indifferent to warning, and of course people who are um, serving God. All right, let's continue. And the raiment there is silk. And they were guided to the good of speech, and they were guided to the path of praiseworthy. Okay, so again, the two disputants, one that we talked about in detail as we move along these verses. Verse 25, those who are indifferent to warning and forsake the path of God and the inviolable place of worship. So what this is happening here is type of people who are actually stopping people from the path of God and stopping people, right, from the inviolable place of worship or Masjid al-Haram. And we understand what Masjid al-Haram means, right? Why is it called Haram? If you need to reflect back or take a look at my other lecture on Aql, right, you will know I explained that, the concept of Masjid al-Haram. So the Masjid al-Haram and the inviolable place of worship, which God says, Allazi ja'alnahu linnas, and we made for mankind equally. Now this is amazing because this place is actually made for mankind. The surah is talking about mankind, types of people, categories of people. And then we have the two disputants, disputing about, God's proofs, right? And here God says, there are people who stop, right? People from, this particular place, which we made for mankind equally. And the one remaining in it and the one without. And those who seeks deviation by injustice therein, him will cause to taste a painful punishment. Okay. So once again, this place is for mankind. It's not just for Muslims. It cannot be just for Muslims because God is saying it's for mankind. So anyone can go and actually take a look at, what's happening there, why, the purpose of the place. And we're going to get to that as we progress through this surah. God is going to tell you the purpose of Hajj, the dispute, the actual argument. Why are these people in different categories of people? Why was this place made? God is going to explain that as well. But for now, just remember that this place was actually created for mankind equally. That's what God says. All right, so let's continue. Now God says, and when we settled for Abraham or Ibrahim the position of the house. Okay, this is verse 26. Moving on. So now God is explaining, right? Going back in time, going back in Abraham's time. All right, what was the purpose? Because it was Ibrahim who actually laid the foundation of this particular place. And when we settled for Ibrahim the position of the house, and the purpose of this house, the purpose of this place for Ibrahim was, ascribe thou not a partnership with me to anything. Allah tushrik bi shay. So that was the reason. And we know from the story of Ibrahim in the Quran in different contexts that he left his father, he left his people, and he actually left, and we know why he left, because people were worshipping idols and they were worshipping tamasil and asnam, right? These two things primarily. And that's why he left, because he said, well, I'm just going to serve one God and I'm not going to ascribe any partnership, right? So, and that was the purpose of this place. So wherever Abraham went, wherever this place is or was, where Abraham went, he was actually advocating, right? One serving one Lord. And that's it for now. The second reason God says what Abraham was to do in this place is purify. وَطَهَّرَ بَيْتِي is keep this place purified, right? Purified from what? Purifying doesn't mean wash the place. Come on. Purifying means purifying from idol worship, purifying from anything that ascribes, right, partnership with God. So purify, keep this place clean from ascribing any partnership to God. This is the reason why God says, "Watahara baiti," keep, purify thou my house, and for who? For those who move about and those who stand. لِلطَّائِفِينَ وَالْقَائِمِينَ, people who move about, like come and go, because this place was created for people to come visit and then go back, right? And why do they want to come visit? Because they wanted to see how Ibrahim was actually conducting the affairs by just serving one God and not, you know, worshiping any form of idols. No stones, no statues, nothing. So this is the second reason, right? And purify thou my house for those who move about and those who stand. I mean, those people who stay there, right? Who are living there. And the lowly. So this is the third, right? Waraka is sujud, and the lowly and submitting. So people who actually are humble, who want to submit to one Lord. So this is the reason up to verse 26 of why this house was created at the time of Ibrahim, which is of course way back in history, 1500 years ago almost, or even higher. So after Ibrahim, of course, his sons Ishaq, Yaqub, and all these prophets that came, they did the same thing. Same thing what? Ascribe thou not partnership, and then of course keep this place, clean, purified from any, you know, idols or anything, right? All right, to continue. Now, verse 27. So let me bring up my agenda point quickly here. So we covered the agenda point number 6, those who forsake the path of God, right? An inviolable place of worship, which we made for mankind equally. Covered that in verses 26 and 27. And then, which of course, we understand the types of people, categories of people, the disputes that people are having, the example, and then people stop people, from coming to this place and actually seeing what, Ibrahim did in this place, the message that Ibrahim conveyed. And this is, a little difficult concept to grasp, but 1500 years ago, Ibrahim actually laid the foundation where people used to come all over the world, on by foot or by, animals. They used to bring their animals together. If you read, the other surahs, which talks about the context, because really the Quran talks about the same story in multiple contexts, multiple areas. But yet, if you add up all these contexts, it's just one cohesive, absolute, complete story. All right. So, of course, no one can stop you from going to, the place of inviolable place of worship, which is Masjid al-Haram. And as you know, these days, because of COVID-19, even if you want to go, you cannot. All right, let's not get into that. So we are talking about verses 27 and 40. Okay, perfect. So I'm on verse 27. This is where God now tells the prophet, and proclaim thou among mankind the pilgrimage. They will come to thee on foot and on every lean camel. Now, when we talk about and proclaim thou among mankind the pilgrimage, okay, which is again, وَأَذَنَ فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ. So people can come and actually argue. People can come and dispute. So whatever disputes they have about God in their own places, right, wherever they're living in the world, they can come to this place with all their disputes and actually see what Abraham was doing and actually talk to Abraham and say, hey, what do we do? We're doing this. We're following these traditions. We're following this culture. In our culture, we do this, right? And we understand there are thousands and thousands of types of religions that people have created, and then they follow those practices. So people used to come from all over the world to this particular place to see what Abraham was doing. And guess what? He's not doing anything, right? He's just, serving one God. That's about it. All right. So they will come to thee on foot and on every lean camel, coming from every deep mountain pass, that they might witness things that benefit them, and remember the name of God on days appointed over the provision of livestock, cattle. So eat thereof and feed therewith the unfortunate poor. Okay, so people used to come to this place, bring their cattle, of course, sacrifice, and then feed the poor and eat themselves and have, give the food to others. Verse 29. Then let them make an end of their unkemptness and pay their vows and move about the ancient house. So have a look around, take a look what other people are doing. Do some trade, because this place was not just to come and visit and do dispute or make arguments about God, but also do trading, right? So this was a happening place. Verse 30, that and those who magnifies the inviolable things of God, it is good for him in the sight of his Lord, and the cattle are lawful to you save that recited unto you, and shun the abomination of idols, and shun false speech. Okay, so not just idols, but also anyone who's talking without any knowledge, right? Remember the three categories of people? Okay, keep that in mind. We bring up the first category, verse 3, second category, verse 8, and third is verse 11. Okay, so keep that in mind. Verse 31, inclining towards God, not of those who ascribe a partnership to him. And those who ascribe a partnership to God, it is as if he had fallen down from the sky and the birds snatched him away, or the wind had blown him to a far off place. That, and those who honors the tokens of God, it is from the prudent fear of the hearts. Verse 33, for you in them are benefits to a named term, then is their destination to the ancient house, and for every community we appointed their right, that they remember the name of God over what he has provided them of livestock, cattle. So God is talking about cattle, right? Not talking about animals, even prior and even now. And your God is one God. So submit to him, falahu aslimu, and bear thou glad tidings to the humble. Verse 35, whose hearts are afraid when God is remembered, and those patient over what befalls them, and who uphold the duty, salah, and spend of what we have provided them, and the camels, we appointed them for you among the tokens of God. Again, talking about cattle, talking about animals. For you is good in them. So remember the name of God over them when they are in lines, and when their flanks become requisite, eat thereof, and feed the contented and the wretched. Right? Once again, God is saying, eat yourself and give it to other poor, give it to other people once you're there. Thus we have made them serviceable to you, that you might be grateful. Right? Because God said, look at these huge animals, right? How humble these animals are, just sacrifice, and they don't even do anything, right? Verse 37, their flesh and their blood reach not God, but the prudent fear reaches him from you. Thus we made them serviceable to you, that you might magnify God for guiding you. Okay? So it's not about actually, sacrificing once a year, or on this big Eid that happens, right? That's a ritual that we sacrifice. It's not just the purpose of sacrificing is actually eating yourself and then dividing it into poor, which is a good deed, which is good. And bear thou glad tidings to the doers of good, Bashir al-Muhsinin. Verse 38, God defends those who heed warning. God loves not every treacherous ingrate. Leave is given, those who fight because they were wronged. God is able to help them. Those who turned, out of their homes without cause, save that they say our Lord is God. And were God not to repel some people by means of others, pious communities would be destroyed, and trade and duties and places of worship wherein the name of God is remembered much. But God helps one who helps them. God is strong, almighty. So let's continue on. Let me bring up the agenda here. This is verse 40, and I went a little bit further to verse 41. Of course, those who, if we establish them in land, would be really humble, right? They will uphold the duty, give the purity, and enjoin what is fitting and forbid perversity. Okay, and to God belongs the final outcome of matters. Great. So now we understand the actual purpose of Hajj, right? Why people came there, what did they bring with them? Animals, sacrificed, they ate, they also shared their, animals, meet with other individuals, people who were needy, people who were poor, for example. And of course, they were there to dispute, right? And find out more information about God. They were fighting about, they were contending about God, the oneness of God. And that's the reason why people, went to Hajj, right? Went to the pilgrimage. Now let's get to the examples presented. Now let's get to the example presented by God to mankind and guidance. So let's go towards the conclusion of this particular surah, which is verse 73. Perfect. So let's continue on from verse 73 to verse 78, which essentially forms the conclusion of this particular surah. So here God says, Ya ayyuhan nas, once again, it's for mankind. Durable muscle. An example is given, example is presented. Fastami'u lahu, so pay heed to it. Listen carefully, in other words, listen, hear it, right? And what is this example? Those to whom you call besides God, innal lazina tad'una min dunillah, will never create a fly, though they gather together for it. So they can't even create a fly, right? So this is an example that God gives. So people who call anyone or anything besides God will never create a fly, even if they were to gather together, all of them. And if the fly snatched something from them, they could not recover it from it. Weak are the seeker and the sought. They measure not God with the measure due him, right? Ma qadarullahi haqqa qadarihi. So people didn't really care about what God is saying, right? God is strong, mighty. Verse 75. God chooses among the angels and among men messengers. God is hearing, seeing. He knows what is their time and what following them. And unto God are matters returned. Verse 77. So now the audience specifically is Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu, right? Oh, you heed warning, oh, you believers, right? People who heed warning. So God is now specifically directing or instructing, the people who heed warning. What should they do? Arkau, be lowly. Okay, always be in submission. What should you do? And serve your Lord. Wa'budu rabbakum, which means whatever God says, you have to do it, right? Whatever God's messenger says, you have to do it in the Quran, because the Quran, if you look at the other lecture, talks about the prophet. God is telling the prophet to say, like kul, right? So anytime the word kul appears in the Quran, means the prophet is now instructed to say to the people, even though God is talking directly to people, right? Like right here, it's God talking to the believers, people who heed warning. But many times, in fact, 270 times, and you can again look for the lecture on that particular, like why the prophet was told to say, even though God could have just said directly, right? So that's why we have to listen to the or obey the messenger as well. So wherever the messenger says kul, that means now the messenger is talking to the people, okay, through God, because God is telling the messenger to say, okay, perfect. So, O you heed warning, be lowly and submit and serve your Lord and do good. Wafalul khair, do righteous deeds, always do good, that you might be successful. And strive for God with the striving due. Wajahidu fillahi haqqa jihadihi. So jihad means to strive, right? To make efforts. He chose you and placed not upon you in doctrine any distress. So God doesn't want any difficulty for for the people who heed warning, for the believers. The creed of your father Ibrahim, millat Ibrahim, millat abikum Ibrahim, right? So this is, the creed of the father. What is the creed of the father Ibrahim? Which is serving one God and not ascribing any partners. And we, talked about this in previous verses. That's what Ibrahim did. That's what the place was for. That's what the Masjid al-Haram was created or designed, or so that Ibrahim and his creed or his zuriyah, right, could actually stay there and talk about the oneness of God and nothing else. He named you those submitted before, who was sammakum muslimin, because Ibrahim was a Muslim. All messengers were Muslims, and today, we just a group of people call themselves Muslims. Quran says everyone was a Muslim. Anyone who submits to one God is a Muslim. وَفِي هَذَا, and in this, that the messenger might be a witness unto you, and that you might be a witness unto men. So, Salah, uphold the duty. Make sure you maintain all of what God is telling you to do. Uphold the duty and give the purity and hold fast to God. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِاللَّهِ. He is the benefactor. He huwa mawlakum. He is the Mawla. But today people have other Mawlas, okay? Excellent is the benefactor, and excellent is the helper. So this is Surah Hajj, complete within context, even though I broke it down into sizable chunks, but hopefully it, the logic flows, the actual story, flows uh, within context. So as a homework, go through, the surah. Of course, you can always read it yourself from verse 1 to verse 78, and you will notice the actual theme, the concept of the purpose of Hajj. What was it designed for? What people did when they actually got there, right? What were they disputing against? Why were they fighting? Categories of people, right? First category, verse 3, people fight without any knowledge, right? Like a person who's absolutely illiterate, doesn't have no clue, right? He's just talking about God. And the second category, no knowledge, no book, no nothing. And the third category, of course, is the type of person who's actually living on the edge. He serves God, but if he's happy, he's good. But if something bad happens to him, then he says, "Well, God, I don't know about God," right? So that's a third category. And then, of course, take a look at the example. And those who forsake the path of God, the inviolable place of worship which we made for mankind equally. So this place was created by God, through Ibrahim for mankind, equal. Verses 25 and 26. But today, only a group of Muslims are allowed, so-called, to go to that particular place. And I'm going to talk about this place as well, where this place is, in terms of archaeological evidence, in terms of Quranic evidence, whether it's Mecca or Petra, which is in Jordan. Because believe it or not, even in Petra, people used to do Hajj, just like they do in Mecca, for decades. In fact, it recently closed down Hajj, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to get into that in a separate lecture. But understand, just the fact that verse 25 and 26 of Surah Hajj clearly say this is for mankind. So anyone can go, right, and take a look at and see what's happening. Even though one aspect, one theory is that this place has now been closed because it was from Ibrahim and many messengers came. Mecca doesn't have any evidence of any other messenger except the last prophet of God, Prophet Muhammad. And of course, proclaim thou among mankind, which is verse 27 and 40, the purpose of Hajj. We took a look at that in depth, and the example presented by God, mankind, and guidance towards the end of this surah. So I hope this helps. Any questions, post in the comments below, and be sure to like, subscribe, and of course, I regularly create and do research on the Quran and bring about the complete revelation by God. This is a complete book. It has all the answers. It has all the themes. We don't need to go outside to fetch and find answers. Otherwise, this book would not be. This book is not just for Muslims only. This book is for everyone who wants guidance from God. With this, wassalamu alaikum.